much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. What a beautiful audience we have. Thank you again for joining us and for that lovely welcome. But welcome back to everyone's favorite game show, Climate Tech Investors Predict, the 2023 edition. This show, of course, is brought to you by Evergreen Climate Innovations, whose 501(c) seed fund is guaranteed to help climate tech entrepreneurs in the greater Midwest succeed and scale their businesses. My name is Paul Seidler, and when I'm not hosting game shows, I am a managing director at Evergreen. We do pre-seed and seed stage investments in climate tech startups. We've been investing since 2014. We've invested in 41 great startups since then. And we love working with entrepreneurs to address climate and environmental sustainability. We're going to have a lot of fun here today. We've got three fantastic contestants joining us. We are here. We're going to prognosticate our climate fate. We're going to make some emissions predictions, and we're going to tell you the future right here and right now. Now, that said, this event is for entertainment and informational purposes only, and anything you hear or learn today should not be used as a basis for making investment decisions. All right, folks, so let's get that straight. We're here to have fun, but don't invest your life savings in the things that we advise today. Now, quickly revisiting the inaugural Climate Tech Investors Predict from last year, 2022. We had three great VC investors, Shilpi Kumar, Shail Khan, and Johanna Wolfson. They battled out. We tracked their predictions over the entire course of the year. And Johanna, it came down to the last week, she won it all. She won the bragging rights, and she also won the opportunity to come back again this year to defend her title. Some of Johanna's picks were super impressive. She predicted that the IRA, the bill formerly known as Build Back Better, would get passed. And if you recall, this time last year, that looked like it was absolutely not going to happen. Johanna also predicted, when lithium prices had risen dramatically this time last year, that they would continue to rise, and they did. But most impressive was Johanna's stock pick of Ormat Technologies, which just really crushed the market and did really, really well. So she is back, but before we bring her out, let's bring out our challenging contestants. We've got a couple new ones that have a lot of great information and insights to share with us today. So without further ado, let's please welcome Hanel Baveja from Creandum. She's joining us from across the pond in Stockholm, Sweden. Hanel, come on out and introduce yourself, please.
Great. Thanks, Paul. And thanks for having me. So as Paul mentioned, I'm Hanel. I have just moved to Europe, or I guess London more specifically, 3 weeks ago to join a European fund called Creandum, which is a sort of a seed Series A fund investing across Europe and the US, actually. And we invest across all verticals. So we're not a climate-focused fund, but we have kind of a budding portfolio in climate, including several software bets in Europe, 3 companies, eNode, Monta, and most recently Tesseract out of the UK. Before I joined Creandum, I spent 3 years at Union Square Ventures in New York, where probably more than half my time was spent investing out of our dedicated climate fund. So USV has sort of both general early stage funds and then climate specific funds. One of the last investments I worked on at USV is in a geothermal company called Zanskar, which is where I got the chance to kind of also work with and meet Johanna in a board capacity. So that has been really fun. And she and I share a passion for geothermal, which is great. Yeah. Anything else, Paul, or is that kind of that is perfect. And can I also mention that you grew up in the greatest city in the country, in my opinion. Yes, I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Paul's favorite city.
Yeah, so, go blue.
A little Midwest connection. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, continue with the Midwest connection. Let's bring out Mark Tomasovic, who's a principal at Energize Ventures based here in Chicago.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Mark. I'm a principal here at Energize. At Energize, we invest in Series A through C companies out of our venture firm or out of our ventures division, and then Series D through really pre-IPO companies out of our growth equity fund. And we're investing in climate software companies. So asset-light businesses that are primarily used to advance electrification and broader sustainability goals. Prior to Energize, I actually worked at ExxonMobil. I was a chemical engineer working on a number of natural gas and chemical facilities, and then went to business school, did a quick stint in private equity, and joined Energize a little over 3 years ago. So excited to be part of this, and yeah, hope to kind of provide some insights on climate software.
Thanks, Mark. And folks, if you want to have some fun, go check out Mark's Twitter profile, because it's pretty sweet. We'll put it in the chat, but the dude loves to spread some engineering marvels. Really, it's super fun, just the right amount of nerdiness. Really great stuff though, all around. Yeah, check it out. He's got a crazy following. And last but not least, let's bring out our reigning defending champion, Dr. Johanna Wolfson. Come on out, Johanna.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me back, and thanks for making me feel awesome about those random things I said last year. Great to be here along with Hanel and Mark. I'm now wondering if a Midwest connection is a requirement for your panelists. I have one as well. Grew up in the great state of Wisconsin. So I am with Azolla Ventures. We are an early stage venture fund, totally focused on very large scale climate change mitigation. We're talking gigaton scale carbon reductions. And we are launched out of Prime Coalition, our prior fund, Prime Impact Fund, kind of paved the way for what we're doing today, but we're all about bringing in catalytic capital to support companies that are of a risk profile. They might not be a fit for other venture firms, at least at the time that we invest. And we are looking for companies that could be, extraordinarily successful, extraordinarily impactful on climate emissions, and have that unique kind of angle on risk that allows us to come in with especially risk-tolerant capital, get them started, and hopefully grow them to a point where they are kind of going toe-to-toe with others. So looking forward to having some fun today and talking about our favorite topic, climate.
Awesome. Thank you, Johanna. Now, let's jump right in. Now, you can't predict the future without looking at the past. So I've asked our three contestants to help us reflect on 2022. I asked each of them to come today with two stories. One, just reflect on a big story from 2022 related to climate, and then also share with us one story from 2022 that surprised them, that they didn't expect to happen. So Johanna, we're gonna stick with you. Give us your two stories.
Okay, so in terms of big story, it's already been mentioned here today. Congress did a thing. Yay, Congress. We got the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a big deal. And it is a big deal. We're, of course, still unpacking the impacts of it, and a lot of companies, doing analysis and trying to figure out how to slot into it. But, I thought it really interesting mix of things, overarching goals in terms of emissions reductions and price targets, and a lot of meat underneath that in terms of power sector incentives, carbon management incentives, got some hydrogen, all over the place, kind of full featured. Now, lots of areas, of course, where we might have wished things were different or gone further, but certainly a huge landmark event, I think, in our nation's history on climate action. In terms of things that surprised me, what comes to mind for me is the announcement, the Frontier Advanced Market Commitment announcement. So I think we even probably talked about it at this panel last year. There were these kind of standalone commitments here and there. It was interesting. I was honestly a bit of a skeptic around those, thinking this looks and smells like, just corporate trend, small scale corporate trends, press releases attaching to them. We'll see where they go. And that remains true. We'll have to see, kind of how these advanced market commitments play out. But the frontier kind of band of companies, starting with Stripe, Alphabet, McKinsey, Meta, and I think one other, they came together and allocated just under $1 billion of advanced market commitments for carbon offsets. And that was a huge signal, in my opinion. Lots of investors in my position wondering, what do I do with these, carbon capture startup companies? Can I think about this as a market yet? It's not clear. Folks will come to their own conclusion about that. But I thought the Frontier announcement was a huge step in terms of indicating that this could be a real market that might have staying power.
Great. Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, the IRA has to be the biggest story of 2022. And yeah, I think the Frontier Fund, I think that is super compelling. It's DAC is not some sort of new breakthrough technology that didn't exist before, but nobody was really pursuing it because there wasn't a market. And maybe now there is a market, obviously, and a lot of entrepreneurs are coming to the forefront. Hanel, what do you have for us?
Yeah, great. So the story I wanted to mention is the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, approving their first ever small modular reactor design. This is from a company called NuScale that's been around for a while. It's NU Scale. It wasn't a total surprise that it happened because the NRC, like many sort of governing regulatory bodies, moves in phases. And so there was sort of a preliminary approval done in 2020, but it's still a really big deal for nuclear fission in the US, and particularly the type of reactor that NuScale is building, which is, as I said, an SMR, or a small modular reactor. There's actually quite a few companies kind of working within sort of the SMR framework. There's a company USV backed, for example, called Radiant Nuclear. That's a team in LA building an even smaller than NuScale reactor called a micro reactor, which is essentially 1 megawatt worth of power. So it can, power roughly 1,000 homes is the right way to think about it. So I think this is a big story. At the same time as, regulatory approval is obviously a huge win. It doesn't solve all of the challenges with nuclear. And small reactors have both benefits and drawbacks, as you might imagine. So a benefit, at least from a venture investor perspective, is that it takes less capital, of course, to build a smaller reactor than to build a large grid scale reactor. But at the same time, you have tougher economies of scale or less economies of scale on the actual fuel reaction within the reactor. So there's sort of questions sort of at scale of how small nuclear reactors may stack up in terms of cost compared to sort of other renewables and energy sources. So I think it's an interesting space to watch, and this has at least sort of opened the gates for more funding going into SMR technology, which I think is a great thing. And then on the surprising story of 2022, it's the stat that climate tech funding in 2022 was more than a quarter of every venture dollar invested. And so, I'm sure I would be really curious for Mark and Johanna's perspectives too, as climate investors. But at USV, when we raised our first climate fund back in 2020, so not too long ago, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it was certainly not more than a quarter of every venture dollar going into climate startups. And so I think the number of both climate specific funds, the size of those funds, and the number of kind of generalist funds paying attention to climate, and just the belief, I think, that's becoming more widespread that the energy transition and the climate transition are huge pockets of are huge profit pools and value capture centers is pretty much only good for the ecosystem of climate entrepreneurs. And so I think that's a surprising but good turn of events.
Yeah, it's not surprising. It is shocking. It is unbelievable where we've come from in clean tech, climate tech, and where it is today with respect to venture funding. And it's fantastic. Mark, what do you got?
Yeah, so I think we can't talk about 2022 without talking about supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine. And so unfortunately, mine is a bit more pessimistic. But yeah, 2022, we're still continuing to see COVID lockdowns, which are affecting supply chain, causing demand destruction, or the bullwhip effect with regard to demand, and really still affecting a lot of our supply chains globally, whether it's food or minerals or essentially any other sort of raw material. And then as those supply chains began to heal, really over 2022, the war in Ukraine was initiated and also caused spikes in energy prices as Russia cut off its LNG supply to Europe, and really caused a whole nother crisis, specifically an energy crisis in Europe that has driven more demand for certain products, specifically heat pumps and other form of demand response and electrification products, but overall has obviously caused a lot of strain on the system. So that was unfortunately kind of the story that we've really focused on from 2022, and just beginning to understand the European landscape a bit better, and really how some of these supply chain effects are really trickling down to things like consumer energy prices. In terms of what has surprised me the most, I guess thinking a bit more domestically, we've really seen a demand or an increase in demand for consumer electrification. So people are now electrifying, their at-home energy through PV installations, their car. Now we're seeing a big movement towards electrifying your stove. And so I think just this year, or maybe really beginning with the Texas freeze last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, people have really started to shift more towards a need for resiliency mindset, and then also have just become generally more climate conscious. I think there was an interesting stat, which was like in 2018, there was 14 auto commercials during the Super Bowl. None of those 14 auto commercials were for an electric vehicle. In 2021, there was 10 commercials, 8 of which were for EVs. So just in general, we're seeing this mass adoption of electrification products and just kind of an increase in climate consciousness here domestically.
Yeah, definitely an exciting trend among consumers. I thought I would play along for this segment and bring a couple stories as well. The first story that I had for 2022, big story, was I think it's exciting to see the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office be really reborn under the leadership of Jigar Shah, someone who I never would have guessed would work in federal government, because let's be honest, he's a loudmouth entrepreneur, right? But he is also someone who wants to make a big impact, and he sees this opportunity as a way to do so. And the Loan Program Office, which had its failures and successes under the Obama administration, had pretty much gone dormant under the Trump administration, and they did under Jigar's leadership, they did their first deal, Monolith Materials, in 2021, and last year in 2022 they announced 4 new deals. These are average of billion-dollar loan guarantees, usually low interest loans that otherwise couldn't be had to finance like large first-time projects to really help scale up new technologies. They also have apparently 125 active applicants in their pipeline, with totaling $119 billion worth of loans, which is oversubscribed for what they have in their budget, but apparently they're getting more funding through the infrastructure bill and IRA. So that's exciting. I think this is a critical piece to financing new climate solutions. The story that surprised me the most happened very late in 2022. I want to reflect real quickly on last year's Climate Tech Investors Predict, where we were talking about geoengineering, solar geoengineering, the idea of intervening in our atmosphere to bring down temperatures. And there's I'm not talking about direct air capture, which is a type of geoengineering. I'm more talking about the more direct interventional ones, where you are emitting something into the atmosphere to to bring down temperatures. And it's a very controversial topic. And we talked about it last year in the context of the distant future. Will this ever be an investable sector for venture capital to pursue? We weren't thinking last year would it be. And at the very end of last year, a startup called Make Sunsets raised a $750,000 seed round. This is being led not by a climate scientist, but some former YC guy. I don't know. This kind of surprised me and scares me. Apparently, earlier this year, they were doing tests where they were emitting sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere in Mexico on the Baja Peninsula. And apparently, even just in this last week, Mexico is now cracking down on this. But they're deploying a business model that they call stratospheric geoengineering as a service, of course. But I think this is something to keep an eye on. We'll talk about it a little bit more later. But let's dig into some market trends. I got a few questions here just to warm up our fortune-telling brains before we get to the real predictions. One thing I want to talk about now, looking to the future, is just like the current economy. Interest rates are rising. It's very uncertain economic conditions. Hanel, what do you foresee in this year with respect to the current economic situation?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very broad question. And so there's, Mark touched on kind of supply chain and energy prices, all of which is, of course, connected to, the economy and interest rates. I thought I would talk about one piece of it and then would love for, everyone else on the call to chime in. I was going to talk about it more from the lens I'm most familiar with, which is sort of like the venture environment, right? And how venture funds, whether at the early stage or growth stage, might be thinking about follow-on capital and deploying AUM in what's a super uncertain time. So even though I talked about how a surprising and positive story about 2022 is the sheer number of venture dollars, I predict that we are going to see a major cool off in terms of number of deals done and number of dollars going into risky, perceived as risky climate bets. As much as I sort of wish that wasn't the case, I think you have a lot of new funds and new fund managers, and a sort of well-known kind of thing in the venture world is that until you start to really return capital to your LPs, which often takes a decade, it's very hard to kind of raise fund 3 and fund 4. And so I think my sense from talking to quite a few fund managers is hesitation around sort of how to deploy capital, especially into climate funds, into climate companies. One kind of concrete example that I've been thinking a lot about is in early stage investments where there's sort of material, science and tech risk, and sort of milestones that need to be hit. Who is sort of waiting at the Series B, Series C to sort of back companies before they've started to generate revenue, right? And I think at sort of seed and Series A, as an early stage investor, you're making a bet on the team, technology, but who really knows? And I think there's this potentially risky sort of middle ground where you've proven some technological milestones, like maybe you have a lab scale prototype, but you need to go out and raise 30, 40, 50 million. I think that's where programs like the DOE loan office and sort of other non-dilutive grant options are great. And of course, you have funds like Lower Carbon that have a lot of capital that they seem to be deploying at scale. But my sort of, I guess, unfortunate or downer prediction is that we're going to see a lot of companies around the Series B stage really struggle to raise capital, and some of them I think will probably not make it, just given the uncertainty in the economy and the sort of venture market as a whole.
So maybe some, not make it if they're not generating revenues, and otherwise not make it. Maybe we'll see some market consolidation.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't really, I think, seen lots of acquisitions, for example, start to happen in climate. And so maybe there's opportunities, maybe there's become more kind of tech IP and team acquisition opportunities or consolidation.
Yep. All right. The next trend I want to explore for this coming year is going back to the IRA that Johanna mentioned. This is like a 10-year bill. This is a lot of capital being deployed over a long period of time. So, but what does it mean in the near term? Mark, you're an investor that's deploying capital into innovations that are touching robust, flourishing markets. I was kind of curious, how do you see the IRA making the biggest impact in the near term, really in 2023?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact is that the investment tax credits and production tax credits were extended for wind and solar, and specifically wind and wind storage. You can now get investment tax credits for those, whereas in the past that was primarily used for solar. And so I think PTCs for wind, on the production side, are now like 2.6 cents per kilowatt hour, and then you can get an investment tax credit for up to 30% of the investment. And what that means is essentially onshore wind is going to continue to proliferate. And so we're going to be able to develop out onshore wind all throughout the Midwest here, and really, continue to just build out that asset class as a whole, given that we now have these extended tax credits. I think in addition to that, the residential component of the IRA is really interesting as well. So I think there's a 30% credit for home energy improvement technologies. So that includes things like heat pumps. And then there's also up to $7,000 in a rebate for purchasing an electric vehicle. So previously you could get a credit for purchasing an EV, but it was restricted to certain OEM brands that were not considered market leaders. So you couldn't get a credit for purchasing like a Tesla. Now you can get a credit for purchasing any type of EV. So I think the residential side is also really interesting, specifically around EVs and heat pumps.
Absolutely. Looking at the time, I think it is time to jump into predictions for 2023. This is what our audience paid to see. This is what they're here for. So we are going to do exactly that. The first section of real trackable objective predictions is everyone's favorite, the magic 8-ball section. So audience, I've allowed our contestants to bring their magic 8-ball for this section only. They are allowed to use it. We're going to have a handful of questions here, and they will use their magic 8-balls to help predict what will happen in 2023. So where I want to start, crypto really crapped the bed in 2022, right? And when, as Warren Buffett says, when the tide goes out, you see who's left with their pants down. Well, FTX, it was more than their pants down. They were doing all sorts of creepy stuff, and now their founder is he's locked up, or all sorts of charges. They were allegedly caught using their customers' cash to do things they shouldn't have been doing. But crypto is not the only place where there's scandal. Let's not forget, in 2022, Nikola Motors founder Trevor Milton was found guilty of wire fraud. So my question for you, with the economy the way it is, and frothy markets haven't come back down to reality, will there be scandal in climate tech in 2023? Let's see. Mark says outlook good. Hanel says all signs point to yes. And Johanna, oh my goodness, we've got consensus. There will be scandal. Wow. This is juicy. All right. Well, time will tell. We will keep an eye on that, and we'll see what happens. Next up, OpenAI made a huge splash with ChatGPT's release late in 2022. There are all sorts of founders now scrambling to launch new startups built on this open source generative AI technology. As far as I can tell, this has not hit climate tech yet. My question, I'm setting the over under at 4.5. Will more than 4.5, 5 or more climate tech startups receive seed funding that are building their startups based on GPT-3 or some sort of other generative AI technology in 2023? 5 or more. Outlook good, and Johanna has her doubts. Being the deep tech, hard tech investor, I respect. All right. Next on the list is, okay, yeah, back to geoengineering. So we talked about make sunsets and my concerns there. Apparently it is a venture investable sector already, who knew? But is it really here to stay or not? So in 2023, will there be 3 or more new geoengineering startups to receive funding, or will there be one that receives like a significant amount of funding, say $10 million of venture funding or more? Either or, three new fundings receiving venture funding, or at least one receiving $10 million or more in 2023 in geoengineering, not counting debt. Johanna says doubtful, but Mark says yes. All right, we've got a game.
I thought we were going to get to throw down on each of these, Paul.
Let's hear it. Come on, jump in.
There is so much dry powder still in climate. Like, even though, interest rates have gone up and everybody's being a bit more skeptical, I think there's still a lot of dry powder. There's a lot of philanthropic capital out there with, 20, 30-year time horizons. Yeah, I think people will still be making bets on this.
So I'm glad Paul caveated, like, we're not talking about DAC here. We're talking about,
Is there a term for what we're talking about?
Sorry?
Is there a term for the type of geoengineering we're talking about? Like crazy geoengineering?
I would call it solar radiation management. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I think, so I haven't spoken to the folks that make sunsets, right? But it's super controversial what they're doing. And it has, whether or not what they're doing is scientifically sound and super carefully done, like this stuff is a lot about public relations, like it or not. And if, and we didn't talk about it, but that was my kind of thinking on the scandal in climate tech, is that, the further we get down this line, the higher the risk is for a huge, public outcry about startups potentially mismanaging their community engagement or their deployment practices. And I have my sense is that, a company doing what Make Sunsets is doing is going to increase scrutiny on any efforts and ultimately make others pull back on those efforts.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts?
Not on geoengineering, but on the
scandal. You got a scandal for us?
Well, I actually was going to say on the scandal point, I don't know if anyone's been following the news about Verra and the kind of independent audit of a lot of the credits on Verra, which is one of the official kind of carbon registries. But basically this independent firm or group of people have sort of shown that there's basically no real evidence that any of the credits listed on Verra are legit or real. So in my mind, that's already a pretty big scandal, because Verra kind of tightly controls that market. But I was going to say on the GPT point, I think I think GPT X climate isn't chat climate, but GPT is just an incredibly powerful model that can create in terms of data sets, temperature analysis. I mean, there's all kinds of kind of data applications within climate that I think we'll start to see these large AI models using. So I'm actually, that one I feel very, very strongly about.
I feel pro on AI. I don't see it on the sub app chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, well, I think you could even take it, into things like reading contracts or evaluating large data sets or whatever. But I kind of want to go back to the geoengineering thing, because couldn't you argue the same thing about FTX and cryptocurrency? Like, highly regulated industry can cause a lot of pain to a lot of retail investors, but it still was backed by several large, well-known venture capital firms that had a lot of dry powder and very big crypto funds. Yeah. So how is geoengineering any different?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I guess for me, when I think, are we going to see these companies get funded? I'm answering that not from the perspective of like, can a few people put together some, like a couple small angel rounds, but rather, like more meaningful seeds, including with representation from institutional investors. And I think in this geoengineering case, like the science is really big and hard. Like we don't know sort of what the full impacts are. That's why a lot of people are encouraging this to stay in the research realm for now. So the science is big and hard. The public perception risks are huge. I mean, for good reason. Like people don't like it when you put unknowns into their air. And that's all crossed with, like the kind of new regulatory frontier that we don't have. So for me, it's like the stacking of things that make it a really tenuous area to move into.
I would agree with what Johanna.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can respond. I agree. I mean, like, and I wouldn't invest in it because of those reasons. But yeah, I'm just saying there's, I think someone would.
Well, and I actually think someone will eventually too, and that there will be a way to do this someday. I hope it is done carefully and sort of with the right steps underway. I don't think that will be this year. We might be wrong. I might be wrong.
And to be fair, there are different types of solar radiation intervention, or however you described it, and they're the ones that are less, I guess, permanent, like using salt spray mist as sort of like a temporary relief. And then there's like, a Silicon Valley dude trying to replicate a volcano in Mexico, and that's where it gets more concerning. All right, let's jump to our fourth Magic 8-Ball question. Last year we talked a lot about fusion, and this year we're getting back to fission. Hanel talked to us about SMRs. For this next one, I want to talk about Georgia Power's the first two new nuclear plants to be built in this country in decades, Vogtle 3 and Vogtle 4, that were originally scheduled to come online in 2016. They recently announced further delays and cost overruns totaling an additional $15 million per day, which is on top of lots of other cost overruns, and it's just been a plagued project. But they say they're coming online in 2023. What do the three of you say? Doubtful. No. Consensus. All right. So some serious Vogtle skeptics here. Talk to me.
Would love to be wrong on this. Would love to be wrong, but I have endless faith in red tape to keep going.
Yeah, people don't realize like how massive nuclear energy capital construction is. And I mean, yeah, these projects are multi-billion-dollar projects. And with any multi-billion-dollar project, they always go over cost and over schedule. There's a thing called the iron law of project management that we used to use at Exxon. And you can either have good materials on time or on budget, and you have to pick 2 out of 3. And I don't think you're going to sacrifice on like materials and safety for nuclear. So you're either going to go over cost or over schedule.
Yeah, I use that for my kitchen rehab too, the framework. Yeah. Hanel, anything to add on that topic?
No, I agree on both. Well said.
All right. So for our last Magic 8-Ball question, just last week, Nest co-founder Matt Rogers unveiled his stealth mode startup, which is called Mill, and their $100 million funding round with some serious big name investors, and they unveiled the product, which is to eliminate food waste in consumers' homes. And it's a really nice looking consumer product, just like the Nest is. It's essentially a kitchen appliance that you put your organic food waste in, it grinds it up and dehydrates it and shrinks it down to a small powder. That powder, the company insists, needs to stay in the food supply chain and not go to waste. And so they want you to mail this powder back to them, which will then be repurposed as chicken feed. Now, the device itself looks pretty cool, in my opinion. I would consider buying one. The problem is I can't buy one, and neither can any of you. You can only subscribe to this food waste as a service / chicken feed supply network. You can subscribe for $33 a month. Maybe there will be some people that subscribe. I don't know. I won't be one of them personally, at least not for $33 a month. But I think it looks cool. My question is, will Mill evolve or expand or change their business model in some way by the end of 2023? All right, we've got 2 no's and a yes, effectively. So, Johanna, you say no, they're doing just fine. This is the way to run this business. Tell me more.
Okay, so I got layers to this. So like I don't know whether their business model will ultimately change. I think the question you're asking is like totally reasonable, right? $33 a month. By the way, I told Paul this before. I subscribe to a take my compost away service. It's actually a little bit more than that. I went and looked it up last night. So think of that what you will of me, but you know, there are going to be people who sign up. There's going to be some first slice of people who do this. Of course, like we know that. And then everything else is about what happens next and can some larger market segment get unlocked? And I think that'll be the big question with Mill. I don't think we will know that this year. I think that the team is going to be super busy. You know, they're still building the unit. They're not shipping them yet. So that's going to take some time to get to a ship ready place. Call it mid-year by the time these units go out and they start gathering some real data around how customers are using it and trying to get past that first band of early adopters like me.
Yeah, I did see, I think ship date was supposed to be spring. If it does get delayed, they'll have no reason to change their business model. They'll have to fulfill those early subscribers. Mark, you are a no as well.
Yeah, I just know way too many people that pay for composting. And yeah, and I asked them, I'm not a composter myself, so maybe I just don't understand it. But I asked them, like, do you use the compost in your garden or something? And none of them have gardens. They just pay for someone to pick it up. And so I just see this as an analog, and you know, it's a very fragmented market where everybody has their own little composter supplier or composter pickup service in their neighborhood, and it just seems like it's growing more than ever these days.
Yeah, and Hanel, what's your take?
I voted yes. I think that changing a business model doesn't mean they have to scrap their whole design. For example, I could see there's so much corporate and employer pressure and demand for sort of providing, becoming a more sustainable or ESG friendly company. It could be as simple as in the second half of this year, a couple enterprises sign up with them to basically offer it as an employee benefit. And so then they're sort of have a B2B angle as well as going direct to consumer. And I think, for an early stage, brand new startup, business model is never certain. So my bet is like something changes in the model this year.
Okay. And I'm all for composting too. Don't get me wrong. I just don't want to have to mail back the byproduct. I will throw it in my yard or garden, and don't want to have to pay another subscription to compost. But
USPS picks it
Chicago,
up.
we don't.
Apparently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just put it on your porch. USPS comes to pick it up, I'm told.
Right. Okay. So that concludes Magic 8 Ball. We're going to move on to the rapid fire section. We have a few slides. Audience, you need to know something important. Our contestants have not seen these questions. This will be the first time they've seen any of this, and they're going to give us their best foretelling of the future on each of these. So let's start with the first one. We're going to start with some commodities, nat gas. Mark, you were talking earlier about this, especially in Europe, but yeah, there's been a global shock following the war. We saw nat gas prices spike earlier in the year, but somewhat surprisingly, they came back down all the way to where they were this time last year. Global markets started to pick up the slack with LNG exports. Europe got more energy efficient, but pretty interesting. And so my question to each of you, give me a number, dollars per MMBTU. What will be the price, Henry Hub spot price for natural gas at the end of the year? We'll start with Mark on this one.
I'll go with 4.
All right. Johanna.
5.
Ooh, Hanel.
I'll go with like 350. Pretty close to this year.
Nice. Glad we didn't get any $1 responses here. All right. Great. Next one. I thought this one was worthy of bringing back. We did this exact one last year. It's just been a wild ride for lithium. So in 2022, let's see, this time last year, we were about 40,000 per ton. It went up as high as 88,000 per ton. And then at the end of the year, came back down to, it closed out last year at $77,000 per ton. Again, what is your prediction for lithium carbonate by the last day of 2023? We'll start with Johanna on this one.
All right, I'm gonna go with 100. 100K.
Mark?
Yeah, I'll go 80.
Hanel?
I was going to go for 100, so I guess I'll take this slight over and go 105.
Ooh, strategic. All right, great. And then I thought we'd do one more commodity of one that is not sort of being so reactive to crazy swings from past year. I mean, it has been relatively more volatile for the market, but copper is just a massive industry. It doesn't swings like what lithium has seen are truly unheard of, but it has been relatively volatile the last year. We don't, demand for copper will certainly increase with respect to the EV market, but it's also fluctuates with buildings, just a lot of copper wire going into buildings and current recession or, less new construction going on currently, uncertain economic times. So we're currently at $8,400 per ton. What will the price be at the end of the year? Hanel?
I'll say 8,400.
Flat. Mark?
Yeah, I'll be bullish. I'm gonna go 11.
Wow, Johanna?
8,000.
8,000 even. All right. Okay, moving off commodities. Climate Tech Venture Funding. This is a chart, obviously, from our friends at CTVC. This is showing quarterly total venture funding coming into climate tech. As you can see, if you look at the last 6 months, it was 20 billion in total funding for climate. The prior 6 months, the first half of 2022 was 21 billion. I want to find out, I want you to give me the next 6 months, the first half of 2023, how much total venture funding per CTVC will we see? So not the whole year, just the first 6 months. Let's start with Mark.
I think the whole market has slowed down, but I think climate is like a really interesting bubble or pocket of the market that has not slowed down as much. So I'm going to go 17.
Johanna?
I was gonna say the same number, so let me go. I'm gonna undershoot Mark. I'll say 16.
Right.
I'm thinking about asset allocators who are, reserving in their portfolio, reserving for their portfolio for troubled times ahead and aren't going to be doing as many investments.
Okay. Hanel?
Yeah, I'll go 15, which is still a lot of money, but kind of, I mean, on the same kind of thesis, and that the first half of the year, I think people will be conservative, and in the second half of the year, maybe more aggressive.
Great. All right. Next one. We have clean tech venture funding by sector. So this is broken down 2021 versus 2022 against, well, they're not sectors. It's what Climate Tech VC, they bucket everything by there's 7 themes, climate themes. The themes are transportation, energy, food and ag, industry, climate management, built environment, and carbon. And so this is looking at the percentage increase or decrease from 2021 to 2022 across each theme. So we saw transportation take a big 31% dip, as well as food and ag. Meanwhile, energy was up 26% in terms of total venture funding. Industry had an 18% increase, but then we have these smaller kind of nichier ones that had these bigger spikes percentage-wise. Climate management up 50%, built environment up 150%, and carbon up 300%. So my question is, in the first 6 months of 2023 versus the first 6 months of 2022, we'll have to get the data. We can't wait till the end of the year because it's not as live versus public markets. So give me the one theme that you think will see the biggest percentage increase in the first half of 2023 versus the first half of 2022. Johanna, you're up first.
Okay, I thought we were comparing the second half of 2022, but that is not the case. Comparing first half of 2023.
First half to first half.
I'm gonna say carbon. I think we're gonna continue to see. I think we're still on the upswing from that.
Okay, Hanel?
I don't know exactly what industry means, but if it means materials and inputs into minerals and stuff like that, I think maybe I that's sort of my understanding.
It's like cement, steel manufacturing.
Maybe not so much cement, steel, but I think we're going to start paying a lot more attention to inputs into things. So I'll go with industry.
Okay, Mark?
Can I go with carbon too?
Yeah.
Or do I have to? Okay, I'm going to go carbon too.
You can, but you'll split the points if you both get it.
Oh, Mark.
Well, it's the smallest base. This is going to be the highest percentage change.
Exactly.
I think we have one more. We're running a little bit behind schedule. There are 12 climate tech unicorns in 2022 that were minted in 2022, became unicorns in last year, according to PitchBook. How many will emerge in 2023? Who went first last time? Johanna did. Hanel, you're up first.
8.
Mark.
4.
Ooh.
Does emerge mean go public?
No, just valuation
north
above
of
$1 billion.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it can still be private.
I would say 5.
Okay. Great. Moving on. The last section is our big bold bets. So we have, I want each contestant to bring 2 companies, one private and one public. The private company cannot come from your portfolio. That's the one rule. But we can't really track the private company prediction, but it's interesting to get people's perspective. And then the public company, give us your stock pick and we will track it. We'll mark the price as of closing today and track it through the year. Johanna, why don't you go first?
Okay. So for my private company pick, Mark actually already mentioned electrification in the home. I'm going to go with a company I saw got some press today, actually, called Impulse. They're developing a super sleek inductive cooktop for in the home. I totally love companies like this that are, developing a slick, high-end first product and then have a cost down curve to get distributed much more widely. So I'm excited about that company, definitely watching them. But my public pick is Planet Labs, ticker PL. I really like Planet Labs. I think they, the reason that I picked them is I think they sit at the confluence of a couple big trends. One is climate resilience. So if you don't know, Climate Labs is doing kind of geospatial satellite imagery for many, many different things, but it can be used to watch for signs of decreasing biodiversity or look out for challenges or opportunities in improving climate resilience. I think we're going to be all paying a lot more attention to that in the months ahead, as well as actually the challenges in the carbon marketplace and lack of good verification strategies. So that's my pick.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark, you're up next.
Yeah, for the private one, I'm going to go with one called Rebus. It's actually a marketplace for steel and aluminum and other types of metals. And I think with all the issues that we're having with supply chain, a lot of these big buyers of raw materials, specifically metals, are going to need a more efficient way to procure their input. And Rebus, they raised their Series B at like a $750 million post. So if they're able to raise an up round, that'll be incredible. But it seems really interesting to me, and it's one that I want to continue to track. In terms of public companies, I'm going to go with one called Quanta Services. The ticker is PWR. It's essentially the US's biggest electrical contractor. And so I figured if we're going to play the electrical or electrification theme in the US, why not index to the biggest electrical contractor? Their stock price has just been on a tear for the last 2 years as well.
Interesting. Good one. All right. Hanel, what do you got?
So I wanted to pick a European private company as I'm now, over here and kind of getting caught up on all the exciting stuff happen. And I think this is, I think a sort of not obvious and maybe controversial pick, which is a French company called Greenly. That's in one of the most crowded spaces, which is essentially carbon accounting and kind of corporate emissions tracking for corporates, which is probably the space that has had the most sort of like venture backed companies. The reason I think this is interesting is they're focused on SMEs. And there's sort of regulation in France and throughout the EU that just sort of got signed into place that is basically going to require even SMEs and small companies to report on carbon, on their sort of carbon footprint and track their emissions. And so this all kind of kicks into place over the next couple of years. And so, maybe 2023 is ambitious, but I think maybe to no one's surprise, the EU is kind of leading the way in terms of, maybe similar to maybe what they did with GDPR and consumer privacy. I think we'll start to see more tailwinds around corporates and enterprises sort of being required to track and report this stuff. So that's my pick. And then for my the public one, I actually think this was the Johanna's winning pick last year. So maybe it's cheating to pick Ormat again. But again, as I said at the very beginning, I'm super bullish on geothermal, and I still think it's like not talked about enough for how much what an amazing technology it is and sort of how much of it we actually have available today. And so I think Ormat will continue to have a knockout tear and do well in 2023.
Fantastic. All right, I'm going to play along with this one. My private company pick is Ascend Elements. This is a company that does lithium-ion battery recycling, returning the materials to high quality, pure materials that can be reused for new batteries. I think this is kind of a big deal in the US, especially as we continue to onshore production and look for new ways to shore up our supply chains. They were last valued at $800 million in September of last year, after a $300 million funding round, according to PitchBook. Since then, they received a $480 million grant from DOE to build a new plant. So I think that they will be continuing to make good progress, hopefully. My public market pick is New York Stock Exchange, ticker MP, MP Materials. They own and operate the only rare earth mine of scale in the Western Hemisphere. This is a small cap company with a $5.4 billion market cap, founded in 2017, went public via SPAC in 2020, which could make it questionable, but they seem to be doing all right. Currently trading about $30 a share. They were down 20% last year, but their net income was $222 million through the first 9 months of last year on revenues of $434 million. They recently signed a new offtake agreement with GM to provide materials for their Ultium platform. So we'll see what happens on that one. Now, we are running over on time, so I was thinking maybe we should cut it here, let people get on with their day. I'm not sure how people, there was the last question, but it's not really a predictions question. Should we call it a show and wrap it up?
Super fast lightning.
Okay, so the last question, super fast, is give us your non-consensus perspective for 2023. As they say, the only way to make money in venture capital is to be non-consensus and right. So pushing the envelope a little bit, who has a non-consensus perspective for this year that you'd like to share?
I thought you were going somewhere else, but let's do that. Mine would be, I think that climate tech funds need to rapidly shift at least part of their focus and funding from mitigation to adaptation and resilience in order to matter and to make money.
Mark or Hanel, either of you have one for this one?
Mine would be that construction will actually remain pretty resilient through 2023. I think even though we'll see, a pullback in commercial construction with rising interest rates, I think there's a flood of money going into infrastructure construction, and there's a housing crisis in the US, which will promote more residential construction. And so I think construction will actually be pretty resilient.
I think there will be a couple legendary generational funds sort of born in the next couple of years, making really non-obvious but strong bets at Series B and Series C, getting really good priced investments where no one else wants to kind of take the risk. And there'll be some stellar performant funds on the venture side. And then also I think this year we'll see some kind of new financial instrument that is a combination of debt and maybe equity in terms of project financing things that doesn't come from the DOE, but comes from some collective of interesting individuals and institutions that also becomes a knockout return in a decade.
Fantastic. Love it. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up. I want to say thank you so much to our incredible contestants for sharing your time, your insights, your vision with us. We will be tracking your predictions over the course of the year. There's a huge amount of personal ego and satisfaction on the line. We will see how it all turns out. I would also, on behalf of Evergreen Climate Innovations, I would like to thank our audience for joining us today. I'd also like to thank my colleagues, Dylan O'Reilly, Ali Gross, and Shashank Shrikant for helping me get this thing up and running. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Please remember, this was for informational purposes only and for entertainment. And don't forget to spay and neuter your pets. Thanks, everyone. Take care.